All right, Shabbat Shalom. This is our Mark chapter study, but we're going to take a diversion a little bit. Not that much, but we're in Mark chapter 13, and last week we read halfway up to verse 18. I believe reminded me, verse 18, and we skimmed over verse 14 because it's a deep verse. It has a lot in it, and I think that there's many things that there's many misunderstandings in regards to verse 14 of Mark chapter 13. So what we were supposed to do was to look at Daniel to see where he was coming from, where he was trying to get us to understand what he's talking about. Now, I hope that in this study we're going to focus on the Abomination of Desolation. And when we're looking at this, I hope that we also make some clarifications as well, because there's a lot of misunderstandings as to what it is and when it happened. And I hope that we get a clarification of that as we read as well. So the verse that we're looking at is in Mark chapter 13. Mark chapter 13, verse 14. Mark chapter 13, verse 14. Well, yeah. So Mark chapter 13, verse 14 to 18. Can somebody read verse 14 to 18? All right, Brother Nate. Go ahead.
14, you said, right?
Yeah, verse 14 to 8. Verse 14 to 18.
And when you see the abomination that lays waste, spoken of by Daniel, the Nabi, put up where it should be not. Put up where it should be not. He who reads, let him understand. Then let those who are in Yahudah flee to the mountains. And he who is on the housetop, let him not go down into the house, nor come into to take whatever out of his house. And he who is in the field, let him not go back to get his cloak. And woe to those who are pregnant and to those nursing children in those days. And pray that your flight does not take place in winter.
Okay. So just to get a clear perspective of the time frame, the empire that's ruling at this time that Hamashiach is talking is the empire of Rome. According to what Messiah said, he's clearly talking about something, a future event, something that's going to happen in the future. And he's warning us, and he's making sure that we understand. One of the things I want to point out is in verse 14, he says clearly, let him that reads understand. Let him that reads understand. So this is not a matter of everybody can have their own view. Everybody can. There's many things that everybody has that freedom of growth, where there's different perspectives, and then there's this, and they all connect. And then as we mature, it becomes we gain more understanding. But when it comes to prophecy, there's always this statement that may mention, verse 5. Take heed lest any man deceive you. The same statement made in the 2 Thessalonians when Paul starts to talk about the prophecy of the future. Take heed lest any man deceive you. And then he says in verse 14, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet standing where it ought not, let him that reads understand, and let them that be in Judea flee to the mountains. So this is extremely important because there's something physical. There's something that we have to actually do physically. Like you spiritually flee to the mountain. I know we can make up a way that that we could flee to the mountains spiritually, but he's talking about physical things, where he talks about woe to those who have children in those days, those who are nursing in those days. Pray that your flight, that's the literal movement, be not in the winter or in the Shabbat. So what we're going to do is we're going to combine all of the statements that Messiah makes pertaining to this idea. What we have to understand is that even though the different Gospels make different references as to what Messiah said at that time, it's from the perspective of different individuals. So what we do is when we're reading these different things, it's not that they are not in harmony, or it's not that they are not connecting together. Is that each different person who wrote each gospel is referencing a different perspective of what he said at that moment. So what we do as we read these different perspectives, we have to understand that he said all of those things. So we put together all of those things to get the big picture of what he said at that very moment. Okay? So even though what he said in Matthew is a little bit different than what he said in Mark, you have to put them together because he said both things. He said both things. And so we're going to look at Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and we're going to put together the verses that mention this particular situation pertaining to the abomination of desolation. Okay? So the first statement that we read in Mark chapter 14, we read 14 to 16, was that the abomination of desolation was going to stand where it should not be. It's going to stand where it should not be. And the Greek word for that stand there, the Greek word for that is the word established or grounded. So it's going to be grounded or established where it should not be. It's going to be placed where it should not be. This is one of the aspects that we're looking at. The abomination, which is a detestable transgression that causes just looking at the simple statement, abomination of desolation. Desolation, does anybody know what desolation means? I think Nate, I think your translation kind of mentions it in verse 14.
To lay waste.
Lay waste, destruction, and one of the things that we must understand is that when there's destruction, when there's a laying of waste, it's because it's a complete destitution of Yahuwah's presence. When Yahuwah removes himself from you, the only thing that lies is destruction, is waste, is elimination, basically. So this is an abomination that leads to destruction. Abomination that leads to Yahuwah destroying. It's not talking about other people destroying. It's talking about Yahuwah destroying. The abominations is what other people are doing. And these are abominations that people are doing that's going to cause destruction from Yahuwah to come. Okay, just looking at the simple statement. So it says that the abomination of desolation, or the abominations, or the detestable transgressions that cause destruction, will be established where it should not be. It will be established where it should not be. Let's go to Matthew, and let's connect Matthew with Mark. Let's go to Matthew chapter 24. And then we're going to go to we're going to look at what the prophets have to say to connect the understanding of what these things are. So let's go to Matthew. Matthew chapter 24. Can somebody read Matthew chapter 24, verse 15 to 18? Or 14. 14. Oh, sorry. 13 to 18. Get some participation here.
Again, if nobody else wants.
Hey, go as many times as you want, Brother Nate. Matthew 24, verse 13 to 18.
But he who shall have endured to the end shall be saved. And this good news of the reign shall be proclaimed in all of the world as a witness to all the nations. And then the end shall come. So when you see the abomination that lays waste, spoken of by Daniel the prophet, set up in the set apart place, he who reads, let him understand. Then those who are in Yehudah flee to the mountains. Let him who is on the housetop not come down to take whatever out of his house. And let him who is in the field not turn back to get his garments.
Okay. So, again, can you read verse 21 just to get an emphasis of when this will be?
For then shall be the great distress, such as has not been since the beginning of the world until this time, no, nor ever shall be.
No, no, ever shall be. So, this is a situation that's going to happen that has not, there's nothing that exists that occurred like this before. The tribulation that's going to occur because of this abomination has never been seen in the existence of this world. In verse 21, I'm going to read it again. It says, "For then shall be great tribulation, such as was not since the beginning of the world to this time, no, nor ever shall be." So the time that this happens, it's not going to be like any other time. You know what I'm saying? So we won't be able to connect it to something in the past. It's going to be something that's the things in the past can point to it, but the magnitude is something nothing. It's not like anything that occurred in history. But go ahead, Nate.
So I know it's more of a question for those of I believe the people who are called preterists, who say everything has already happened.
Yeah.
So I think with that verse,
right.
That's something that kicks that out, because if it's something that's never happened,
right.
a lot of cities have been ransacked and destroyed, and things have happened. But saying that this has never been seen like before on this wise, then has it stuck out when you read that?
Praise God that you mentioned that, because that's a very important point. Many people place this situation on 70 AD when the Romans burned down Jerusalem and the temple. Have Jerusalem been burned down before? Yes.
Several times.
Absolutely. Several times. Several times. So is Rome surrounding Jerusalem and burning it down something that has never been since the beginning of time? Absolutely not. It's happened multiple times in history. So it has nothing to do with 70 AD and the bringing down of Jerusalem when the army of Rome surrounded the temple and burnt it down, or surrounded Jerusalem and burnt it down. So we cannot connect it to 70 AD because it's a situation that has replayed in history because of the disobedience of the Yahudim. Okay? So this is just one clarification location. 70 AD cannot be here. You have to take that out. So now back to verse 15 of Matthew chapter 24. Because now he doesn't say stand where he ought not. He gets a little bit more detail. He says now stand, or that word means established, or like what you were said, Brother Nate, you said set up. Set up or establish is similar references. So the abomination, the detestable transgression against Yah, will be set up in a set apart place, or set up in a set apart place where it ought not. I'm combining Mark and Matthew. Set apart place where it ought not. So there's abominations that's established in a set apart place where it should not be. Okay? And then he says, when you see this, get to the mountains. When you see this, get to the mountains. So it's very important because we have to see it. We have to recognize it. The signs of the times. We have to be able to point it out. Abomination that causes waste or causes destruction by Yahuah is established where it should not be established. And we're going to look at the different empires to see how they established. There's been many examples of how that looks. Many examples of how that looks, and we're going to see how those things caused destruction specifically from Yahuah because of the abominations. Go ahead, JP.
I was just wondering, as far as the Matthew 24:16, where it speaks about then let them which be in Judea flee into the mountains. I mean, is it specifically for that region? You know what I mean? Like as if this area flee from? You get what I'm saying? Because it says specifically for Judea to flee in the mountains. So I was just wondering some thoughts on that.
Yeah. This is what I see from it. Judea, a lot of times when you're looking at Yehuda, when you're looking at a lot of references of places, a lot of times they're referring to people. They're referring to people. It's not necessarily people that's living in those areas, but the names represent a type of people. We're going to see we're going to see another name added in the book of Luke right now. That's a good question. We know that it's physical, and so that way it makes sense that you ask if Judea is the actual physical place. But we're going to see what it means when the abomination is set up. It's not really talking about any particular location. It's just saying when you see it established. So that's one of the things that we got to recognize. That Revelation talks about a worldwide deception, and Hamashiach is talking about a worldwide deception as well. Because in verse 21, he says that this is going to be a tribulation that has never been seen before. And he just previously in Matthew 24, verse 7, starts talking about different nations as being affected by this corruption. So we're looking at a worldwide situation. So Judea or Yehuda is very specific as to who it's referring to. So a lot of times when it says those who are in Yehuda, is very important to recognize that he's talking about the type of individual that you are. Because when you look at what Paul said, Paul mentions those who are Yehudi, that if you are Yehudi outwardly, that you're not a Yehudi outwardly, that you're or Jew, you're a Jew inwardly. And it says those who are in Judea or the city of Judah. It's kind of like a spiritual reference of the physical people, and he's telling those physical people to flee. Those who are in Judea to flee to the mountains. So it's interesting that it doesn't say to flee Judea. It says those who are in Judea go to the mountains. But let's see if we could connect more dots. you're looking at verse 14, it's just another reference, JP, to the worldwide situation that's occurring. So verse 14 says, "And this gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in all the world for a witness unto all nations, and then shall the end come." Then it says, "And when you shall see the abomination of desolation spoken of." So while the gospel is being preached worldwide to all the nations, you're going to see the abomination of desolation set up, not just in Judea, but everywhere that you're preaching the gospel. So this is a worldwide situation, and those who are in Judea are actually those who are a Jew inwardly. That's what it's referring to. He's telling his people to be ready, those who surrender to him. He's not talking about a specific bloodline. He's talking about all those who are a Jew inwardly. Flee. When you see it, go. You know. So, detestable sins causing waste or destruction, established in a set-apart place where it should not be. Go ahead, Nate.
I'm sorry, I caught it. I caught it. I'm good.
Okay. So stop me, because this is not just us reading through a chapter now. This is a prophecy study. So Messiah makes it clear. Let him who reads understand. So we're not here to be polite. We're here to understand. You know, and the more inspiration that we can get, and more clarification that we can also get, because we just clarified 70 AD doesn't fit. There's a lot of individuals that place this prophecy on 70 AD, but it doesn't fit, because it's just Jerusalem has burnt down many times before. So just because Jerusalem burnt down by the Empire of Rome does not mean that it's never happened before. It has happened before. So this is talking about something different. Let's go to the book of Luke. Let's go to the book of Luke. Now, the book of Luke, just to give a reference as to how Luke obtained this book, the same way that he obtained the book of Acts, by taking other people's witness. Those who were with Messiah, those who were there, he was able to record their witness or their testimony and place it in the book of Luke and the book of Acts. You could find this out in the first chapter of the book of Acts, how he took the record from other individuals and put it together. He was also a witness because he was with Paul towards the end of that book as well. But in the book of Luke, he received there's many thoughts as to how he obtained this record. Some people even believe that the book of Luke is Peter telling him what went on with while Messiah was on this earth. So this is how he's obtaining this record from other witnesses that was actually there. So let's look at this. Luke chapter 21. Can somebody read Luke chapter 21, verse 14 to 24? Luke 21, verse 14 to 24. Anybody? Yep. Good. Go ahead.
Therefore, resolve in your hearts not to premeditate on what to answer, for I shall give you a mouth and wisdom which all your adversaries shall not be able to refute or resist. And you shall be also betrayed by parents and brothers and relatives and friends, and some of you shall be put to death, and you shall be hated by all because of my name. But not a hair on your head shall be lost at all. Possess your lives by your endurance. And when you shall see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, then know that its laying waste is near. Let those in Yehudah flee to the mountains, and let those who are in the midst of her go out, and let not those who are in the fields enter her. You should start between
verse 24.
I'm sorry. Because these are the days of vengeance to fulfill all that have been written. And woe to those who are pregnant and those who are nursing children in those days. For there shall be a great distress in the earth and wrath upon this people. And they shall fall by the edge of the sword and be led away captive into all nations. And Yasharal shall be trampled underfoot by the nations until the time of the nations are fulfilled.
So Jerusalem shall be trodden underfoot by the nations until the times of the nations shall be fulfilled. I know many people already know where this is referenced also in the book, in the writings of Paul, in Romans chapter 11, talking about the times of the nations coming in. Let's read one more thing, Nate. Read verse 25.
And there shall be signs in the sun and moon and stars, and on the earth anxiety of nations, in bewilderment at the roaring of the seas and agitation, men fainting from fear. Oh, I'm sorry. That's 6.
No, you can keep going.
I just lost my place.
Verse, you could go down to verse 27, verse 26 and 27.
I just lost my place. I'm sorry, my phone moved. Give me one second. I'm sorry. 26. Men fainting from fear and from expectations of what is to come on the earth, for the powers of heaven shall be shaken. And then they shall see the Son of Adam coming in a cloud with power and much esteem. And when these matters begin, you said 27?
You can read 28. 28 is the last one.
And when these matters begin to take place, look up and lift up your heads, because your redemption draws near.
Okay. Now, 70 AD, 2020. Yeah, this is not referring to 70 AD. When you look at verse 20 is the reference that we need to combine with Matthew and Mark. So let's look at verse 20. It says, when you shall see Jerusalem surrounded with armies, then know that the desolation or the waste or the destruction is near. When you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, and then it says, let them who are in Yehudah, in Judah, flee to the mountains. So this time it references two cities, Jerusalem and Judah. Now, I hope everybody did their homework as to going back to see what Daniel actually said. I hope everybody did that. But if not, we're going to do it together. So Daniel talks a lot about the armies. And this is very clear that this is the statement that was made when he was referencing the prophet Daniel. So when you're looking at the whole statement, he's saying, when you see the abomination set up or established in the set apart place where it should not be, surrounding Jerusalem with the armies, then you know that desolation is near. You have to combine all those things. Standing in a place where it should not be, in the set apart place surrounding Jerusalem, this is when destruction is near. Now, if verse 24 of Luke chapter 21, I just want to establish a point. When you look at verse 24, it says, "And they shall fall by the edge of the sword, and shall be led away captive into all nations. And Jerusalem, again, shall be trodden down of the nations until the times of the nations are fulfilled." So it says that the nations will be trotting down Jerusalem until it will be constantly trotting down Jerusalem until the times of the nations is fulfilled. Now, Jerusalem was burnt down, we all know, 70 AD. Can the nations continuously trot down something that has been destroyed already? Like, can we continuously destroy Sodom and Gomorrah? Can we continuously destroy things that has been destroyed already? We cannot continuously destroy a building. If you destroy a building, you can't continuously trot it down. So we're going to look in Daniel, because Daniel mentions the trotting down of the sanctuary as well. And we're going to recognize that there's a connection between the two, because there has to be, Hamashiach said, just like the prophet Daniel prophesied. So just to make clarification, Mark says, standing in the abomination of desolation, standing where it should not be. Matthew says, the abomination of desolation, standing in the set-apart place. And Luke says, when you see Jerusalem surrounded with armies, you know destruction is near. So now there's something that the wicked is going to do, and there's something that's going to be happening to Yah's people at the same time. The wicked are going to be doing certain things. The wicked are going to be establishing things that they should not establish, and those who is referred to as Jerusalem will be affected by the armies of these governments, the armies of these things. So let's look at the first reference of Daniel, the first reference of the abomination of desolation. And just to get everybody interacting, anybody know where the first reference of the abomination of desolation spoken of in the book of Daniel is located? Anybody? JP, go ahead, brother. JP?
Oh, yeah, this is Nathaniel, by the way. Sorry, I thought I was unmuted. Daniel 9, I believe, correct?
Daniel 9, let's see.
I don't remember. I know there's one in 1131.
Yeah. So Daniel 9, Daniel 11, but there's also a reference in Daniel 8 as well.
Oh, okay.
So let's go to Daniel 8 first, and then we're going to look at Daniel 9. And we got to correlate what Daniel is saying to what Hamashiach is saying. Okay? This is what we're going to do. We're going to put together what the Messiah is saying and the description that he makes with what Daniel is saying, so we can get a clear view of a time frame of a prophecy. Because there's only two options for us. See, Messiah talked about something that was going to happen in the future. There's only two options for us. That something started in the past already, or that something will start in the future. So these are the only options. Now, not in the past, Messiah's day, that something happened in our near past, or something will happen in the future. So we're gonna try to see which one of those are, because it clearly did not happen before Messiah. Messiah is pointing us forward to the end. So we have to recognize, when is this end? Because I hear another clarification of a lot of people. They don't really think this is the end for the last days, but we're going to see how the evidence tells us what times we're actually in. So Daniel chapter 8. Daniel chapter 8. Okay. Now, Daniel chapter 8, in the very beginning of Daniel chapter 8, the first 12 verses, it's talking about two great empires, one represented as a ram with two horns, one bigger than the other, and one represented as a goat with one big giant horn. The goat with the big giant horn represented the kingdom of Greece, and the big giant horn represented Alexander the Great, the first king. The ram represented the Medes and the Persians, which is why they had two horns, one bigger than the other. And the empire, or the goat with the horn, destroyed the ram with the two horns. So this is what's being described in Daniel chapter 8. Now, when you're looking at just to give a reference in Daniel chapter 8. So in Daniel chapter 8, just to give a reference of what these things are, it actually says it in verse. Let's see. Sorry.
Verse 13.
Verse 13. Well, yeah, that's the reference of the Abomination of Desolation. But in verse just to give a reference of what the first 12 verses is talking about, in verse 20, it says, "The ram which you saw having two horns are the kings of the Media and Persia." And verse 21 says, "The rough goat is the king of Greece, and the great horn is between his eyes is the first king, which is Alexander the Great." So I'm just proving what's mentioned in the first 12 verses of Daniel chapter 8, because we can't read it. Nate, you want to say something, brother Nate? Go ahead.
Just a question.
Yeah.
If we know, I was discussing this with some other people recently. The Medes and the Persians today, who they are, and if they're still there, if they're the same people, or the Medes and the Persians are different people. Like, people, different people. I was under the impression there was two different peoples who combined, like a kingdom was combined, and one really didn't overtake the other as such, as maybe like like we talk about first, how they married and combined two kingdoms that were in Spain at the time to make one kingdom, but it was, two different peoples. Just your thoughts on that, that's all.
Yeah. No. Historically, because the Medes and the Persians now is kind of like scattered as well. Like, you won't be able to kind of really determine. You can determine geographically like where they used to be located, but as far as the people, you can't. It's so intertwined. So the Medes and the Persians, Media or the Medes were different people than the Persians. It was just that these two governments allied with one another in order to take over other kingdoms. We see that Babylon was actually taken over by the king of the Medes, Cyrus, and then we see that the king of Persia later on, Artaxerxes, is actually in power. Is the one that sends back Israel back to Jerusalem to rebuild the temple. So yeah, it's two different people, two different governments that connect themselves in order to take over other empires.
So
but it's go ahead.
You don't. So and I'm not saying I believe that. You don't think they're the people who are in Iran or Persia today?
I don't believe so. No. Like I said, when they were taken over by Greece, Greece was on some. Greece really OD. Greece really was like, everybody's going to be Greek. So they may be there, but I'm pretty sure it's one in Greece, and when the Romans came in again, so to get like a pure group of people, I don't think there's a pure group of people. And then Islam came, so then, Islam is not a nationality, but it seems like it is. Islam is not a nationality. But looking at that part of the geography, it's intertwined. It's just like looking at Egypt. You look at Egypt, you can't go there and find like one type of people. Like Egypt is like it's like a junction. It's where every nation goes through. So when you look at an Egyptian now, like they don't look Arabic, they don't look black, they look like mixed with everything. So that's kind of similar to the Medo-Persian, to the Persians and the Medes and things like that. Certain nations have mixed so much when they were conquered. It's like they can't really have you don't have a pure ancient civilization anymore. Just like Babylonians, like we're not gonna find no pure Babylonians. We know that Iraq is where Babylon is, but we're not gonna find like purebred Babylonian people there. You know what I mean? JP, brother.
Yeah. How I see that is as connecting a couple dots here as we've done. We know that the Medes and the Persians represents the bear in Daniel chapter 7. And then in Revelation 13:2, we see this beast coming out with the feet of the bear. And how I interpret that is that beast being Rome. And what is the bear? Well, the bear represents Medo-Persia. And how does a bear fight? It fights with his hands. And so you have to look at how Medo-Persia fought historically. Persia was a coalition of multinational, multi-kingdoms. He adopted the term King of Kings, to where the Persian king was the King of Kings, and so he would essentially amalgamate an army into himself. And so, like, if anyone's seen that movie, I'd recommend not watching it. But if you've seen it, you understand that movie 300. To where the Persian forces is just many different kingdoms' armies as they're sending him towards, King Leonidas, the Greeks, which is actually a historical event. I forget what they call it, Hermopolis, I believe. And so essentially the feet of the bear, the Persian side, would be a standard coalition of coalition forces under one banner, but multi-nations. And the word that we get from Medes is the word that we have today as medium, and then also media. And the Medes and the Persians, the media aspect, they fought with a conglomerated coalition, like information warfare, so to speak. And so Rome, being that beast that rises out of the sea in Revelation 13:2, Rome having the feet of the bear, the feet of Medo-Persia, Rome adopted the same fighting style. It fought with the standard coalition forces, multi-racial under one banner, and then also information warfare. So you have like conventional physical warfare, the Persian side, and then like the battle of the mind with the media on the Mede side, which is like a coalition. We see that today with the conglomerates. If you look at who owns all the media companies, it's essentially under one banner, so to speak, or they're consolidating together, and they fight. That's why the Medes wasn't the two great horns, one higher than the other. Obviously, the physical has more strength than the informational when you really put the brass tacks on it. But that's kind of how I see it, at least in the spirit of the Roman adaptation. When they took the feet of the bear, they took the fighting style of the mind and the body warfare of Medes and Persians.
Okay, right. So we're gonna try to keep this as simple as possible. And there's a lot of other information, historical information, and things like that we can add to it. But as we want to kind of get the crux and kind of eliminate the things that I think earlier we clarified that certain things could not be 70 AD because of the description that was made. So we're going to try to eliminate certain false views and just lay the foundation, the groundwork, because we're gonna be talking about this as if we're just now studying it for the first time. while we're here in Daniel chapter 8, can somebody read verse 8 to 14? Eight to 14. Anybody? Daniel chapter 8, verses 8 to 14.
I got it.
All right, go ahead, Don.
Chapter 8, 8 to 14.
Yep.
All right. Therefore, the he-goat waxed very great, and when he was strong, the great horn was broken, and for it came up 4 notable ones toward the 4 winds of heaven. And out of one of them came forth a little horn, which waxed exceeding great toward the south and toward the east, and toward the pleasant land. And it waxed great, even to the host of heaven. And it cast down some of the host and of the stars to the ground, and stamped upon them. Yea, he magnified himself even to the prince of the host. And by him the daily sacrifice was taken away, and the place of his sanctuary was cast down, and an host was given him against the daily sacrifice by reason of transgression. And it cast down the truth to the ground, and it practiced and prospered, practiced and prospered. Then I heard one saint speaking, and another saint said, unto that certain saint which spake, how long shall be the vision concerning the daily sacrifice and the transgression of desolation, to give both the sanctuary and the host to be trodden under foot? And he said unto me, unto 2,300 days, then shall the sanctuary be cleansed.
All right, and
Want me
can
to
you
keep
read
going?
verse 24?
24.
Just verse 24? Mm-hmm.
And his power shall be mighty, but not by his own power. And he shall destroy wonderfully, and shall prosper, and practice, and shall destroy the mighty and the holy people.
All
Keep
right,
going.
so just breaking this down ground level, we saw that in the first 12 verses, the empire of Persia, the empire of Greece. We saw that Greece was the empire that destroyed Persia. I think we all know that historically. There's many books written during the time, such as Maccabees during the time of the Greek Empire. And when you're looking at verse 8, it says that the he-goat, which we know, according to scripture, is Greece. It says the he-goat waxed great, and when he was strong, the great horn, which we know is the first king of Greece, which is Alexander the Great. It says that the great horn was broken. It came up 4 notable ones toward the 4 winds of the earth. So when this horn was broken off, it broke into 4 pieces. Before I move forward, I just want to make sure everybody understands historically what that means. It's also mentioned in Daniel chapter 7 as the leopard beast with the 4 heads. Does anybody know why the four heads, or what does it mean that the horn broke off into 4 notable pieces? Does anybody know? Anybody? No, people are not saying anything because anybody can answer the question.
4 generals.
Yes. When Alexander the Great died, he broke his kingdom up before he died into 4 pieces and gave each piece to each one of his generals. And then it says here in verse 8, it says, it came up 4 notable ones toward the 4 winds of the earth. And verse 9 says, and out of one of them came forth a little horn, which waxed great, exceedingly great, toward the south and toward the east and towards the pleasant and it waxed great, even to the army of heaven. And it cast out, I was referring to the armies of the earth. A lot of times when it says heaven, the heavens and the earth, it's really synonymous to one another. And it says, and it cast down some of the hosts of the stars to the ground, and stamped upon them. And he magnified himself even to the ruler of the host, and by them the daily was taken away, and the place of his sanctuary was cast down. So when you're looking at this, it's talking about something that's rising out of this divided nation. Historically, the divided nation, the next nation after Greece that rose up, everybody knows, because in the New Testament, when Hamashiach was walking on this earth, that nation, that empire was actually in power. We know that directly after Greece was the Roman power. But how that Roman power came into play is what this is referring to. The Roman influence came from the Greek influence. That's why in the very beginning of the Roman Empire, it was referred to as the Greco-Roman era. The Greco-Roman meaning it was like a transitional period between Greece and Rome. It was like an amalgamation type of situation. All right, so now look at what happened. When he started to magnify himself, he started to take away the daily sacrifice and was taken away the place of the sanctuary and was cast down. Now I want to ask this question. Did Rome take away daily sacrifice from the temple? Anybody can answer yes or no.
What was the question?
During the Maccabees, I think.
Did Rome, in the New Testament, Rome as an empire ruling, did Rome take away the physical sacrifice from the temple?
I'm sorry, man.
To rule over Jerusalem.
Kind of broke up.
Huh? Say it again?
No, I couldn't hear you. You kind of broke up when you was asking the question.
Oh, okay. I was asking, did Rome stop the daily sacrifices from occurring when they began to rule over Jerusalem?
Yes.
No.
No.
No. Let me let a couple people with their hands up. Go ahead, JP. Oh. Hands down. JP, go ahead, JP.
The physical, no. The spiritual, one could argue they did.
Yeah, because they oppressed them. They were not able to do things the way that they wanted to do. So, absolutely. There was still a morning and evening sacrifice. There were still sacrifices going on. So, let's continue. Linda, you had your hand up as well. You want to make a mention of anything?
No. Let me see. No. I was just going to mention something, but no. I'm being quiet. I'm learning.
Okay. So we see that there's an extension, right? So we see that there's a movement throughout history. We went from Persia to Greece. Now we're in Rome. We're Persia, Greece, Rome. Now, when we're looking at what's going on, we're looking at the stopping of the sacrifice, right? And we're gonna touch on another clarification as well. Verse 13 says, "Then I heard one saint speaking to another, saying, said unto them that a certain saint which spake, How long shall the vision concerning the daily and the transgression of desolation, to give both sanctuary and the host to be trodden under foot? And he said unto them 2,300 days, which shall then shall the sanctuary be cleansed. 2,300 days. Now, what's the famous view? We're going to get clarification. What's the famous view of what this represents? We saw 70 AD doesn't fit with the times that has never been, the tribulation that has never been, and that's going to be horrible. The abomination of desolation, which will be horrible, right? That's never been on this earth. Remember that. This is what Hamashiach said Daniel was talking about. So what is it that many people believe? And I don't know, maybe Sister Linda was going to mention it. Many people believe this situation is in regards to historical. Does anybody have any idea of what's been normally mentioned?
Well,
Usually, what's usually mentioned is Antiochus Epiphanes, which is a Greek. He was a Greek empire. You can read about him in the Book of Maccabees. A lot of times they interpret this abomination of desolation to Antiochus Epiphanes. Now, if you connect it with what Hamashiach said that this is going to be a time in which has never been seen before, according to the book of Daniel. But guess what? When Messiah said it, the Greek Empire has already passed. So how would this be, with the transgression of desolation, how would this be pertaining to Antiochus Epiphanes if Messiah is mentioning what Daniel was saying as a future event rather than a past or historical event? So we have to recognize that this cannot be the Greek Empire, that this has to be a future controlling government after Messiah. This is a future controlling government after the Messiah. So let's look at it. It says that they shall have 2,300 days, and then shall the sanctuary be cleansed. And I had Dom also read verse 24, I believe. Right? Yes, verse 24 to give us a little insight as to what was being trampled. It says that the temple was being trampled. Now, if we're looking at the Empire of Rome, we're looking at the system that Messiah is pointing to after his death. Messiah died. What was the importance? What happened to the temple services? When Messiah died, what happened to the temple services? This is very important. Let's look at it. Let's go to Daniel chapter 9. Let's go to Daniel chapter 9. And can somebody read verse 27? Anybody? When Messiah died, what happened to the temple services? Daniel chapter 9, verse 27. JP, go ahead.
All right, let's see. Daniel 9:27. What verses you want? Just one verse? 27.
Well, the other verse is going to take us into another prophecy. I'm just sticking to Abomination of Desolation. It's hard right now.
No, I know.
Real hard right now.
Okay,
but
so
I just want to make sure that we understand Abomination of Desolation. So go ahead and read the book. Let me see. Go read read verse. Yeah, just read verse 27. Sorry.
Okay, no, that's all right. It says in Daniel 9:27, and he shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week, and in the midst of the week he shall cause the sacrifice and the oblation to cease, and for the overspreading of abominations he shall make it desolate, even until the consummation, and that determined shall be poured upon the desolate. Interesting.
All right.
He shall confirm.
Right. So he shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week. Who is going to confirm the covenant? Yeah, probably should have read verse 26 and verse 25. So I'm going to read verse 25 to 27. All right. So listen to this. Know therefore, and this is 25 of Daniel chapter 9, that from the going forth of the commandment to restore and to build Messiah, meaning to the time that the Messiah comes. The ruler shall be 7 weeks and 62 weeks, or that's 62 weeks. The street shall be built again and a wall even in troublous times. And after 62 weeks shall Messiah be cut off, but not for himself, and the people of the ruler that shall come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary, and the end thereof shall be with a flood, and unto the end of the war desolations are determined. He shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week, and in the midst of the week he shall cause the sacrifice and oblations to stop. It's referring to the Messiah. The Messiah is going to confirm the covenant for 1 week, prophetic weeks, for 1 prophetic week. In the midst of the week, meaning in the middle of that week, he is going to cause the sacrifices and the offerings to stop. In verse 26, it says that the Messiah shall be cut off, but not for himself, and the people of the ruler that shall come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary, and the end thereof shall be with flood, and unto the war desolations are determined. Okay, so the Messiah is going to confirm the covenant for 1 week. Prophetically, a day is for a year. You know, the time frame is it's very important to understand the length of time, because it's literally telling you that when the command goes out to rebuild Jerusalem, it's from the time that they were told to go back to Jerusalem all the way to the time that Messiah came. So this is very important. You know why? Because this literally gives us a timeline prophetically from the time that they were leaving Persia or leaving the Persian Empire in the book of Ezra all the way to the time that Messiah came. It gives us like a literal year time frame. So if you're looking at this, 62 weeks was like 62 literal weeks was not the time that they were set free from the Persian Empire in the book of Ezra, chapter 7. It does not give you 62 literal weeks, does not bring you to the time that Messiah came. Okay? So 62 weeks. A week is 7 days. 62 times 7 is 490 days. Now, prophecy, a day is for a year. He even used it in the book of Exodus when he says that they shall wander in the wilderness for 40 days. And then he says, 40 days shall be unto you 40 years. He did this in many different parts of the prophets. He referenced that a day is for a year in prophetic, in future time. When he's telling time for the future, he usually gave dates based off of a prophetic day, which is a prophetic year. I hope everybody's clear on that. So when he says 62 weeks, that's 490 days. That's 62 times 7. A week is 7 days, 62 weeks, 62 times 7, 490. He says that he shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week. How many years is 1 week prophetically? I need some interaction because it's too quiet.
7.
7 years. So 1 week, 7 years. It says that in the middle of the week, what's the middle of 7?
3.5.
Mm-hmm.
3.5. How long, according to historical view, how long was Messiah's ministry? I know now there's many different views, but how long was Messiah's ministry?
I always thought it was only 3 years, but so I'll say my answer is 3.
Well, yeah, because when you look through his life, you see 3 Passovers in this during ministry. During his ministry, you see 3 Passovers. So we Passover comes once a year. So his ministry was 3.5 years. 3.5 years. So it says he shall confirm the covenant for 1 week, and in the middle of the week he will cause the sacrifice and the offerings to stop. So I said, when Messiah died, what happened to the services of the temple? Does anybody know? Come on, guys. Anybody? What happened to the temple?
It ceased?
It definitely stopped. When Messiah died, the necessity to sacrifice definitely stopped. Who has their hand up? Let me see. Sister Linda, go ahead.
Yes, I have a question. But during the time that the Messiah walked the earth, there weren't any sacrificing being done in the temple, was there? Hadn't the whole sacrificial
Oh yeah, absolutely.
process stopped?
No, they were sacrificing. Matter of fact, when Messiah healed the leper, he told him to go to show himself to the priest and to make sacrifices according to Moses. When Messiah was born in Luke chapter 2, Miriam actually, when Miriam went to the temple where her purification was over, she offered the sacrifices from for her purification when she gives birth. So they were still offering sacrifices. They were still giving incense. They still did the morning and evening sacrifice, and they still did the feast offerings as well.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and animal sacrifices were still taking place also?
During the time of Messiah, yeah.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Yes. Yeah. He told when he told the lepers to go to the priest to show himself, he said also to make the offerings according to Moses. And according to Moses, when you are healed from leprosy, according to Leviticus chapter 14, you had to offer an animal sacrifice to basically ratify your cleansing. So it was still going on. Sacrifices didn't stop. See? Sacrifices did not stop. There were sacrifices in many places. Matter of fact, let me see. They were still offering incense, but that's let me see. Go ahead, Brina. Or Dom.
It's done. So I got a question. So verse 27 is that's confirming that the Messiah is making himself the sacrifice?
Absolutely. That prophecy is saying that him being cut off is what caused the sacrifices and the offerings to stop.
Okay.
That he confirmed the covenant for 1 week, and in the middle of the week, he caused it to stop. And because right after he died, his disciples basically continued that ministry. And about 3.5 years later, that's when they actually was told to go to the Gentiles. You see, Peter wasn't told to go to the Gentiles until after a time period went by, which was basically a confirmation. The confirmation of that 1 week. After that 1 week, when Messiah was cut off, 3.5 years later, that's when Yah told Peter to go to Cornelius' house. That was when they started going to the Gentiles.
Because a lot of people like to say that once the Messiah sacrificed himself, he laid everything on the cross, and then they don't have to follow the laws. They don't have to follow certain laws, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. The scripture is very clear as to what was nailed to the cross. The penalty was nailed to the cross. Whatever is fulfilled by the Messiah was not nailed to the cross. Fulfillment is not necessarily any law nailed to the cross. Fulfillment was meaning bringing to reality something that was a symbol. So when Messiah died, he brought to reality the death of all those sacrifices that was made to represent him. the peace offering, the sin offering, the transgression offering, all of those offerings. It was by his death, by his blood, by his life being given. He basically fulfilled or brought to reality those actual offerings, those sacrifices. But as far as any other law, like any laws being done away with, that, no. Everything is brought to reality. So now when we make sacrifices, when we make offering, we offer from the mind. We offer from within our words. We should probably have a conversation. So I just want to point out let me see. I'm trying to point out something that Sister Linda was saying, because I think it's very important to kind of prove these questions. So I'm just looking for one example. I'm going to the time in which the Messiah was born. All right, so in Luke chapter 2, it talks about when the Messiah was born. So I'm going to read from verse 16 to verse 22. And it says, "And they came and made haste and found Miriam and Joseph and the babe lying in the manger. And when they had seen it, they made known abroad and saying that which was told to them concerning this child. And all they that heard it wondered at those things which were told to them by the shepherds. But Miriam kept all these things and pondered in her heart. And the shepherds returned in glorifying and praising Elohim for all the things that they had heard and seen as it was told unto them. And when the 8 days were accomplished for the circumcision of the child, which name was Yahusha, which was so named by the angel whom he was conceived in the womb. And when the days of her purification, according to the law of Moses, were accomplished, they brought him to Jerusalem to present to Yahuah. As it is written in the law of Yahuah, every male that opens the womb shall be called set apart unto Yahuah, and to offer a sacrifice according to that which is in the Torah of Yahuah, a pair of turtle doves and 2 young pigeons." So when she bore a male child, I'm pretty sure you guys noticed, when she bore a male child, she had to actually go through a purification process of, I believe it's 33 days plus 7 days, right? So 33 days. And then at the end of those 33 purification days, she would have to go to the temple and offer the sacrifice of the turtle doves and of the pigeons in order to ratify her purification. So here we see that Miriam actually fulfilled that sacrificial ordinance, which is located in the book of Leviticus. So yes, they were still doing sacrifices and offering sacrifices during the time of Hamashiach. Hamashiach was living during a time in which the sacrifices and offerings were not yet fulfilled because he has not yet died. All right. So what I wanted to bring up was that the Messiah, when Messiah died, the temple, does everyone remember that Sister Linda, go ahead, sister, sorry.
So, Elder Jadiel, do you know did the Messiah, did he offer sacrifices also? Did he, like at Yom Kippur, at the times when the sacrifices were we were instructed, and he did fulfill all righteousness. Did he offer sacrifices also, even though he was without sin? Do you know? I mean, I guess that's a question that. Do you know of any instances here?
Messiah, right. The Messiah never offered a sacrifice.
Okay, all right.
Never offered a sacrifice.
Okay.
The book of Hebrews confirms it, because in the book of Hebrews it says the reason why he could not be a priest on earth was because he would have been required to offer sacrifices for his own sin, just as the high priest was, had the necessity to offer sacrifice for his sin. So this is what Hebrews says. This is why he could not be a priest on earth, because he would have to follow through with offering the sacrifice. And it's clear the sacrifices and offerings of bulls and goats never was able to take away sin. It was always faith in the death of the Son of Elohim.
Thank you very much.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. So I hope everybody grasps that. So when Messiah died, the veil ripped in the temple. The veil ripped down in the temple. And I'm just gonna point out a historical view, take it with a grain of salt. This probably didn't even happen, but whatever. It's just interesting that this is written in history. Josephus made mention of the time in which the veil ripped during the time of the evening sacrifice, and according to Scripture, there was an earthquake at that time as well. And when that earthquake came and the veil ripped, the sacrifice, according to different books, they said that the evening sacrifice, because the Messiah died at the 9th hour, which was the time that the evening sacrifice was made. The evening sacrifice was basically canceled because of the ripping of the veil. So when the veil ripped, they kind of stopped their normal proceedings as far as offering the evening sacrifice. So this is interesting. When we see that that the temple and the sacrifices stopped, now we go back. I'm sorry that it took this long, because we're going to have to stop now. So now we go back to Mark and Matthew, where it says standing in the holy place. Standing in the holy place. Now, if the death of the Messiah ripped the veil of the temple between the most holy place and the holy place, showing that according to Daniel chapter 9, verse 27, that the sacrifices and offerings have stopped because the sacrifice that was to come has come. What would it mean in the future that someone is standing in the holy place of the tabernacle or of the temple, or that the sanctuary will be trodden underfoot, or that Jerusalem will be surrounded? You see what I'm saying? So we have to recognize what is it saying that those who are in Judah have to flee to the mountains. Those who are in Jerusalem will be surrounded by armies. What does it mean? That the abomination that's desolate, that's going to bring destruction, is set up or established in the set apart place. What would that mean if the actual temple veil ripped, showing that the sacrifices has already stopped when the Messiah died? The reason why I'm bringing this to you is to show you that the sanctuary that's being trodden, according to Daniel 8, verse 24, is the holy people, is the set apart people that's being trampled in the future. This is after Messiah died. Yah's people is not offering sacrifices during this tribulation. You see what I'm saying? But Yah's people is spiritually offering sacrifices, and Yah's people is referred to as the tabernacle or the temple. We are the holy place. Why are we the holy place? Because we are where the Ruach HaKodesh dwells. Wherever the presence of Yah is holy. Remember, Moses had to take his shoes off because the presence of Yah was there. Joshua had to take his shoes off because the presence of Yah was there. Wherever the presence of Yah is set apart. So when we receive the Ruach, we become the habitation of the Ruach, and we become the set apart place of where the Ruach dwells. Mecca, go ahead, brother.
Yeah, that makes me think of, Yahusha, when he was telling the disciples, he said, surely I tell you that, the time will come when no man will worship, in Jerusalem, at this temple, right. But the true worshipers of Yah will worship Him in spirit and in truth. So that does kind of I think that's pretty interesting. An interesting connection.
No, absolutely. And this is why I want everybody to mention what comes in their mind, because the Messiah, that's John chapter 4. The Messiah mentioned that you're not. He said soon you're not going to worship here or in Jerusalem, but the Father is looking for people to worship Him in Ruach and in truth. So, America, that's definitely like a very important verse in this whole connection, because Hamashiach was looking at Jerusalem and saying that you guys miss your visitation and that your house is left to you desolate. That it's desolate. It was already desolate. So when Hamashiach died and the veil ripped, it was a confirmation. It was just like, hey, I'm confirming this separation, and not only this separation, but I'm opening the path to the most holy place by faith. I'm opening. So when you look at Hebrews chapter 10, Hebrews chapter 10 tells us that we're able to go through the throne of grace boldly by the veil of Hamashiach's flesh. This is in Hebrews chapter 10. So we're told, it breaks it down how a lot of the things that people think is done away is still actually active in the reality sense, in Hamashiach, in the reality of what those symbols actually represented. So when the veil ripped, it represented the body of Messiah being ripped, and because of his body being ripped, we were able to gain access to the throne, which was the Ark of the Covenant, to that covenant that Yahuwah was restoring to his people. Go ahead, Michael.
No, that was an accident, bro. Sorry.
Oh, no, that's all right. So when we go back to the statements in the Abomination of Desolation spoken of by Daniel, Messiah is talking about a future instance. He's not talking about a time in which they were offering sacrifices. Like I said, they were still offering sacrifices during the life of Messiah. Matter of fact, Messiah actually gave instruction to the leper when he healed them to go and offer the sacrifices according to Moses, according to the Torah of Moses. We see that Hamashiach's mother made an offering according to the purification offering of the male childbirth. So we see that sacrifices is occurring, but when Messiah died, the sacrifices ceased according to Daniel chapter 9, verse 27. So it gives us an indication of where in the future Daniel is taking us. So Daniel 8 took us from Persia to Greece, and now Daniel 9 is taking us to the time that Messiah died. So we're still going, because in Daniel 11 it still talks about the abomination of desolation still, and it's bringing us further and further into the future, well, into Hamashiach's future. But we're gonna see if it's something that occurred in our near history that is still occurring now, or something that's gonna occur in the future and has not yet happened. And I believe, according to Scripture, it's going to show that this has already began. The abomination of desolation has already began, and it's going through a time period that Scripture kind of reveals is going to happen. So when it talks about Jerusalem, after the days of Messiah's death, when it talks about the temple, the holy place, we cannot place it on a temple, a physical temple, because when Messiah died, the veil ripped. And Messiah said clearly in John chapter 4 that there's going to be a time where you're not going to worship here or in Jerusalem. So for us to be looking for people to worship in Jerusalem, Messiah is very clear. You're not going to be worshiping on this mountain or in Jerusalem, but Yah is looking for people to worship him in Ruach and in truth. So when it says that the abomination that causes desolation is set up where it ought not, in the set apart place, now we're in a spiritual description. Now, just because I say spiritual doesn't mean it's not physical. There's a spiritual holy place, or there's a spiritual tabernacle or a spiritual sanctuary that Yah has set up prophetically and in the future. But I don't want to kind of exert this right now, so we're gonna kind of continue part 2 next week. But I do want to see if anybody has any questions so far of the verses that we read so far. Go ahead, Brother Nate.
Just a clarification. So when you were speaking of the sacrifices ending, I know that was the purpose of Mashiach coming and dying. But are you saying that the those who rejected him did not ever attempt to sacrifice again, or they didn't try to repair the veil that was rent in twain? I mean, I know for us who believe, yes, they ended, and there's no more need for them, but or for anybody, but for those who rejected that, they didn't try to reestablish that there was never another sacrifice.
Well, it's kind of like not to Yah, not in Yah's eyes. When Yah by his son ended the sacrifices, whenever sacrifices was mentioned in Scripture, it was never referred to as an animal sacrifice. You look in the book of Hebrews or the book of Peter, every time it mentions sacrifice, it was referring to something that we offer with our lips, not anything that we offer animal-wise. So,
Okay.
like I said earlier, just because something is fulfilled doesn't mean that it's done away with. That's the confusion statement, done away with. So just because animal sacrifices is not made doesn't mean that we don't offer sacrifices. But the sacrifices that we offered has always been offered. This is the way that has always been offered, and you can check that out in Hebrews chapter 11 when it talks about how Abel offered a more excellent sacrifice than Cain, and he was not referring to the animal. It says specifically, by faith, Abel offered a more excellent sacrifice. So it wasn't the animal that Yah accepted; it was the faith that Yah accepted, and it was the faithlessness that he rejected in Cain as well.
Okay. I mean, I agree. I just wanted for clarification. I really want to say that nothing ever happened.
Now, of course, those who did not follow Messiah, when you look in the book of Acts, those who did not follow Messiah, they were still offering sacrifices. Matter of fact, they were still mentioning that sacrifices was a necessity in order to get your sins forgiven, rather than believing in the Hamashiach. So when you look in the book of Acts, you'll see that, people are still trying to go to the temple, but that's not what the believers of the way actually taught. The believers of the way did not teach that. Matter of fact, they thought Paul was doing away with the whole Torah because he was explaining that Hamashiach was a sacrifice. So they thought he was trying to do away with the whole Torah, when he was not. He was just trying to show that he was our sacrifice.
Okay. Thank you.
No problem. Kevin Minnie.
Yeah, that's this is my first go. It's my first study. So I just sat back and listened and man, it's amazing. It's amazing how you put these scriptures together to come to this point. I'll comment in on that. Hamashiach was our last sacrifice. I'll say it like that. He was the last sacrifice. As far as the desolation, my view is that the false prophet is going to be over there. And when he steps up into the joint and says, hey, I'm the Most High, that at that point right there, and that's when you need to take out and go to the mountains, which brings me to this question of when or where, when he says go to the mountains physically, well, where's that at? If there is a place physically. when you refer to the temple of us being us, worshiping in truth and in spirit, that's us as individuals.
That's
So
a good question.
Yes, sir.
When referencing what you mentioned about the abomination that makes desolate, we're going to read about historical desolations that occurred, and a lot of times the desolation that was occurred has not been because individual claimed to be, Elohim. Caesar at one point said he was Elohim, and there was many different emperors in history that referenced that they were Elohim. The thing that caused the destruction was when they tampered with Yahuwah's vessels. If you look at the time of Persia with Belshazzar, and Belshazzar took the vessels from Yah's sanctuary, and he offered it to his gods. That was when Yahuwah said, "Your house is left. You have been found wanting, and this night you will be taken over." From the Babylonian king Belshazzar. So when he took the vessels from the temple, and this is just when you're looking at the reality of the sanctuary, we are the vessels. We are the sanctuary. So when he took the sanctuary vessels and he started to pollute it, and he started to offer it to their gods, this is when Yahuwah stepped in and brought destruction to Babylon. So likewise, this is how, when you look at Revelation, you're going to see the term Babylon mentioned. So when it talks about mountains, it talks about the separation between us, it talks about the separation between us and everything. But this is what set apart means. But there's a aspect of living according to the simplicity of your means. If we're in cities, when we're in cities, this is when cities are surrounded, cities are taken over. When you live in the city, you are in complete dependency of the government. And what Hamashiach did many times was he went to the mountain in order to cultivate his relationship with Yah, in order to pray. He would pray all night in the mountains. He would spend times in the countryside. He would stay away from the cities. The only time that he went into Jerusalem was so he can be a light there. But other than that, he would stay away. He would be with the multitudes by the sea, by the fields, in the mountains. This is where he usually would be in order to cultivate himself with Yah, and in order to get his disciples to also cultivate themselves with Yah. So when it says that we ought to flee to the mountains, I believe that it's referring to literal areas in which you are able to be disconnected from the government. Yeah, I know it's hard for us to be completely disconnected, but let me give an example historically. During the Great Depression, when the Great Depression happened, I believe it was in the 1920s, farmers who were located outside in the mountains in the countryside, farmers were actually unaffected by the Great Depression because everything was so heavily dependent on the government that the government was able to make laws and rules and all of these things in order to force everybody to do certain things and get certain things from certain places. But the farmers, those who were self-sufficient, were able to be, to have they didn't even feel a depression. And I believe that this is what Yah wants us to do. In regards to us being set apart, he does not want us to be a part of these governments in which when they set up these wicked abominations or detestable transgressions against Yah and causes everyone to have to be in the midst and force everybody to be engulfed in it. What Yah wants us to do is to set apart ourselves away from whatever they're doing. So it's not only like when a person is finally dictating and making these laws, because you may not have an opportunity. The statements was when you see that it's set up, when you see that it's being established, that's when you leave. It's not saying when you see the person there doing certain things. No, it doesn't say that. It says when you see the abomination of desolation set up or being established, you have to go. You know, you have to set yourself apart. You know, and I believe that at that time, as we look at more evidence, we're gonna see that a lot of that time that it's referring to has already started. Even the 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, Paul says that the mystery of iniquity has already working. It's already working during Paul's day. You know, so we're gonna discuss that a little bit more. But I believe that it's physically telling us to go to places in which we are less dependent on government and we are more self-sufficient on Yah.
Okay.
And more self-sufficient and more reliant on Yah and his blessing.
That was beautiful, man. Thank you.
No, praise Yah. Mecca, go ahead, brother.
I forgot what I was gonna say, brother. Sorry.
No? Say it again?
Yeah, it slipped my mind what I was gonna say. What I was gonna say. It slipped my mind. So yeah, I have to try to hopefully. It'll come back to me. Yeah. Sorry about that.
All right. JP, go ahead, brother.
You know, I was talking to one of the brothers before, not from our fellowship, but somebody else that, and they were speaking about, and this is what we're talking about, sacrifices and them being done away with. And I mean, I know we don't got much time to go through it, but pretty much, I don't know if it would start like in Ezekiel 43, maybe. But then you're reading these portions of Ezekiel 43 and 44, and I was looking at 44, and he talks about sacrifices, and it's seeming like this is the future. This is in the heavenly realm. But then you start to see like he's sacrificing in the heavenly realm. So, and it speaks about the specifics of, you know, what should be sacrificed and that sort of thing. So I'm not sure, you know, if there's any thoughts on that I would like to. I mean, I guess the basic question, just speaking about Ezekiel, to say to somebody who believes that there's going to be sacrifices in the kingdom, you know, what will be some of your thoughts on that? You know what I mean? That we could share to somebody like that, because I mean, I don't see flesh and blood inherit the kingdom of Elohim. I mean, that to me, it does away with it. You know what I mean? But here in Ezekiel, it does show some significance of like a sacrifice or something. So I was just wondering if you ever had any thoughts on that.
I believe that certain sacrifices, and I think that a lot of times we disconnect Hamashiach from certain sacrifices. So we say that he represents the sin offering and the transgression offering, but he doesn't represent the peace offering, which is ridiculous since he is the Prince of Peace. And he's referred to as Shiloh in prophetically in Genesis by Jacob. You know, so we have, you know, all these sacrifices that represent the death of something in order for the blood to make some type of atonement or some type of connection between us and Yah. And the only blood that did that was Hamashiach's blood. So to separate some sacrifices from others would say that Hamashiach's blood didn't do everything, didn't bring a completion. It says that in Hamashiach we are complete. We are complete in him. So it would show that we're not complete in him and that we still need to offer some other blood in order to gain some type of connection. Like, no, Hamashiach is our connection. He is our connection. So to disconnect him from any sacrifice wouldn't be scriptural. He is every sacrifice. He is the sacrifice that connects us to God with peace, with transgression, purified him. So there's no way that we can disconnect Mashiach from any sacrifice that was offered in the book of Leviticus. You know, go ahead, JP.
I was just going to mention, so do you think that, like, for instance, with this Ezekiel portion, chapter 43, you know, where I just see, okay, 43:25, it even says 7 days shalt thou prepare every day a goat for a sin offering, for instance, just as a quick example. You know, I was wondering, maybe Ezekiel here is not just speaking about the future in the heavenly realm. Maybe, do you think there could be like a blend or something? I'm just trying to understand. I mean, and we can talk about this at another time too. I don't want to, you know, because I just want to be able to try to figure out.
I think it connects.
Go ahead, bro.
I think that question connects because Daniel chapter 9 verse 27 says that in the middle of the week he caused sacrifice and offerings to cease. He didn't say pause. He didn't say he was going to stop for a while and then come back. It says to cease. So in our mind, if this is like, let's say, millennium reign, right? Millennial reign and then eternal reign, right? But if Messiah caused it to stop, why would it start again if his blood caused it to stop? His blood doesn't change. Like, it's going to be, his sacrifice is a sacrifice forever. It's not something that it becomes nullified and then it reinstitutes sacrifice again. You know, no. So when you look at certain prophetic views, we just talked about, you'll see that in scripture, it actually reveals certain prophetic views as spiritual realities. And when I say spiritual realities, I don't mean metaphoric. I mean that it's actually a physical reality. When we offer sacrifice, we physically lift up our voices and offer sacrifice. Romans chapter 12, verse 1, it says that we are a living sacrifice. So the sacrifices are still physical. They are just not animals anymore. You see what I'm saying? The temple is still physical. It's just not a building anymore. It's us. You see, the priesthood is still physical. It's just not the Levites anymore. It's us. You see what I'm saying? So we have to recognize that there is a reality. It's not done away with. There is a reality, and that reality is us and Messiah together. It's not the symbol that was supposed to help them to get the Messiah. It's us and the Messiah together. You know, so we have to recognize that we're not doing away with anything, but we're bringing these things to reality the way that Hamashiach, the way that Yahuwah wanted these things to be in the very beginning. We go to Exodus chapter 19. Before he tells anybody to do anything, before he tells the Levites to do anything, he says that I want a kingdom of priests. I want a kingdom of priests. This is what he said. So when they started to offer the sacrifices to the golden calf, the only people that came on the side with Moses to the line in the sand were the Levites. And he honored the Levites for making that choice to come on his side, and he honored the Levites by putting them as an example to everyone else, making them the priesthood. But initially, Exodus 19, he wanted all of his people to be priests. He didn't want one tribe to be priests. Matter of fact, he didn't want one person to be a prophet either. Numbers chapter 11, Moshe says, Yah wants all his people to be prophets. But he was not able to obtain that people because there was many people who were rebellious and had no faith. So he gave them these symbols to practice so it could help them to get that faith. So when you're looking at Ezekiel, you have to apply the spiritual reality, the physical spiritual reality of those things, just like every other thing. When you're looking at Amos chapter 9 talks about the rebuilding of David's tabernacle. When you go to Acts chapter 15, it says that the rebuilding of David's tabernacle was when the Jews and the Gentiles received Ruach. So if the rebuilding of the tabernacle of David was not a physical tabernacle, it was the people receiving the Ruach, why would the sacrifices in that tabernacle be real animal sacrifice? It doesn't connect. You would have to be consistent in the prophecy. If one is brought to reality, then everything has to be brought to reality. We can't keep the symbol at any point in time if Hamashiach came and brought that to reality. So far, real quick, a recap. So far, we read Matthew 24:15-18, Mark 13, verse 13 to 16, and Luke chapter 21, verse 14 to 24. And what he did was we put together all the references of the abomination of desolation, and we saw how the detestable transgression that causes destruction is set up in the holy place, set apart place where it should not be, and that the armies will surround Jerusalem. So this is what we have to recognize. Our armies that surrounding Jerusalem representing that there's government authority. So you have government authority, and then you have standing in the set apart place. So you have government authority, and then you have also religious authority. But we just read in the book Daniel 9:27 that Messiah ended the sacrifices. So the holy place that he stands in wouldn't make sense for him to be an actual temple, but to be a government religious authority over Yah's people. Remember, he's only talking to people who believe. He's not talking to people that don't believe. When you look at Matthew 24, when you get Mark 13, he's only talking to the disciples, his students. So what he wants to do is he wants them to understand that they are going to be in the tribulation and that they need to be able to recognize when the government begins to be a certain way. And abomination of desolation is a reference to understanding how the government is going to look when they begin to receive that tribulation. I hope that that's clear. So the holy place cannot be an actual temple. As in Daniel chapter 9, verse 27, it says that when Messiah dies, the tabernacle veil was ripped and the sacrifices ended. So that's where we're going to stop today. But when we come back, we're going to break down the abomination of desolation in Daniel chapter 11 and Daniel chapter 12. And we're going to see how, what it actually means for us today, like what it looks like now, when we open our eyes and look around right now. So we're gonna pause this study at Daniel chapter 9, verse 27. We're gonna continue next week with part 2 of the abomination.